Okay, let me get this out of the way right out the gate. The Little Prince is my favorite book of all time. There it is. In fact, episode number 11 of this very podcast is an homage to Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's classic novella, and because of that episode, I've already had multiple people ask me for my opinion of the animated film adaptation that was just released on Netflix. So, here's something a little new to 401 Stories. We are going to do a movie review, so buckle up. Let me kick things off with another caveat. Despite the fact that this movie is based on my favorite book, I am no cover-thumping purist. Now, not only am I completely okay with making changes and deviating from the source material, I encourage it. Any reasonable fan cannot expect a book to be able to transition seamlessly from paper to screen. The only thing I require, is that once you're done adding, subtracting, embellishing, whatever you decide to do, once you're done with all that stuff, I expect the final product to keep with the point of the book, the soul of it. That's it. Change whatever you want, change characters' names if you really need to. Do whatever you can in an attempt to adapt it from one medium to another, but don't miss the point. So, moving on.
I'm not so sure I want to grow up anymore.
Growing up is not the problem. Forgetting is.
I definitely don't want to forget.
Well, I managed to grow up, and I never forgot The Little Prince.
The most noticeable change in this film adaptation, and it's obvious even if you've just seen the trailer of the movie, is the addition of a brand new storyline through which the viewer meets the Little Prince. There's a young girl whose overbearingly obsessive mother has mapped out her entire life in hilariously meticulous series of charts and calendars, and this little girl meets a strange old man who turns out to be the aviator, the author/illustrator of the book that we all know and love. And through their May-December friendship, the little girl learns of the Little Prince and learns the great lesson: what is essential is invisible to the eye. And she also learns the folly of growing up and of forgetting. So this is kind of a typical mysterious mentor storyline where an odd character reveals great truths to our protagonist. And I love these types of stories, ranging from Charlotte's Web to Stranger in a Strange Land to Stargirl to Dead Poets Society, and I consider myself an aficionado of them. You pretty much always end up with a bit of friction and drama because other characters in your story consider the mysterious mentor to be dangerous, when in fact their wisdom is just upsetting to the status quo. And unfortunately, the aviator in this Little Prince adaptation actually is dangerous, which to me is the first major flaw of this movie. He is extremely dangerous. The introduction of his character comes when he's attempting for the 100th time to fix his airplane, and for the 100th time, something goes awry, and the propeller flies off, going through his fence, through the little girl's wall, and destroys the kitchen and her quote-unquote life plan. I mean, the symbolism here is obvious, but putting aside any of the subtext, in terms of the actual plot, he literally almost kills the girl. And so, this old man just goes over into a complete stranger's yard, retrieves all his stuff, and without so much as even like a handwritten note of apology, he just walks off with his propeller, completely oblivious and apathetic to the destruction he's caused to his new neighbor's house. All right, and, I'm willing to give the filmmakers the benefit of the doubt here. They wanted to make the aviator, when we first meet him, a little bit scary so they could show the full arc of his budding friendship with the girl. Fine. I can look the other way. But even later, after the aviator and the girl are firmly entrenched in their friendship, they're driving down the street in the aviator's old, broken-down jalopy, and this beautiful butterfly flies between the two of them. It is a gorgeous slow-motion moment where in that moment, these two friends are present, and present only in the moment, and they are focused on one thing, on the beauty of that butterfly. And it's a gorgeous little scene. And the car plows through an intersection and narrowly avoids a 3-car pileup and the almost certain death of the main characters. So, when the little girl's mother forbids the girl from ever seeing the aviator again, it's not because, like in the grand tradition of the mysterious mentor story, it's not because she's this deluded grown-up who doesn't get it and doesn't see what's truly important. It's because the aviator is a dangerous fool and that he's almost killed the girl numerous times, and this completely contradicts what the point of the story should be. That being young at heart is a noble, no, it's a necessary pursuit to avoid becoming the type of cold, lonely, miserable grown-up that the book, and presumably this movie, is just meant to skewer. Now, it's a common and justifiable complaint in storytelling, be it prose or film or television or whatever, when a female character is, and I quote, obviously written by a man. It happens all the time. Now, I have a similar complaint that happens almost as often, and this happens in a lot of movies, and especially in this one, where the children and the supposedly virtuously childlike characters were obviously written by a grown-up. Now, the aviator, who's supposed to be showing us what happens when you live life properly, like the Little Prince, this guy's a complete mess. He's selfish almost to the point of sociopathy, but he's inconsistent in his childlike ways. For instance, when the girl returns the first few pages of his Little Prince stories, he's inexplicably, weirdly self-conscious about it.
I just wanted to give your drawing back.
Oh, you didn't like it?
No, I did.
No, it's not very good, is it?
I think it's nice.
This man has lived ballpark 50 years following these lessons learned from the Little Prince, and he's allowed himself to become this unashamed pariah of society, but yet he's concerned, for once, that someone is actually judging him. And this is not the picture that we should be seeing. Okay, moving right along, leaving behind the girl's storyline, and well, also, yeah, she is unnamed. This character has no name, and here's another gripe of mine. When an adaptation of something is slavishly faithful to the wrong stuff in the source material. In the movie, The Little Prince, all of the characters, just like the book, are unnamed. They're the girl, the little prince, the aviator, the businessman, the mother. And this totally works in the context of the book. But it's silly. It's silly that this young girl would talk about her new best friend that she's known for a few months as, quote, the aviator, instead of, I don't know, Antoine or Tony or Pete or whatever. The choice is one that becomes very, very, very clunky in the last third of the movie, and is something that, if they really wanted to make the story more accessible to a modern audience, they easily and should have changed. But I digress. So, leaving behind the girl's storyline for a moment, the adaptation of the actual source material, so like the scenes that are taken straight out of the book, when they actually decide to do this, those scenes are breathtaking. They're heart-wrenchingly beautiful. Some of the most gorgeous computer animation I've ever seen, evoking this kind of mix of Henry Selick's stop-motion animation and like a delicate diorama made out of fine tissue paper. It's magnificent. An almost perfect adaptation of Saint-Exupéry's sketches, and that, to me, is both the greatest achievement and the biggest disappointment of this movie. If they had decided to actually adapt this novella with this animation and this character design and with the lovely score and the A-list cast of voice actors they had in their pocket, this could and should have been a masterpiece. But instead, the focus was so heavy on the present-day storyline of the girl and the aviator, as well as the weird third act of the movie, which I'll get to in a few moments, that what they did was they edited down the original book, which takes about 2 hours to read, into maybe 15 minutes of this magical adaptation they're able to do. Like 15 minutes. And the rest is just the stuff they made up. So much of the charm of the book is in the back and forth dialogue of The Little Prince with all the various characters. And that dialogue was almost completely eliminated for more of a quick hits montage style of storytelling, where you just skip very quickly between some of the characters that he meets. And it is such a waste to have, like, Benicio del Toro as the snake and to give him, like, 4 lines. What a waste to have such beautiful, beautiful art direction for the various grown-ups that the Little Prince visits on his journey through the asteroids, but to edit all of these scenes down to a few lines on only actually 3 of the characters, and then to just skip all the rest. So much of the charm and wisdom and humor and beauty was in the Little Prince's Socratic questioning of these grown-ups and their absurd reasoning. Now again, allow me to restate that I never wanted and do not want a 100% faithful adaptation of the book. But they made a fatally poor choice in gutting this section of the book when they showed, albeit briefly, that they could have expanded on it. Now, there's this quick moment when the girl is watching her mother rattle on about the charts in her life plan, and the girl imagines her mom as one of the absurd grown-ups that the Little Prince meets, but on her own little asteroid planet, and it's an inspired scene that just shows that this movie is oozing in potential. And you don't need to go and create a new storyline to modernize this book, but you can, for instance, just add new grown-ups as commentary on modern society. Like this helicopter parent that her mother is a perfect example. And politicians, fanatical sports fans, religious demagogues, cell phone addicts, bloggers, podcasters. There's so many options that have sprung up since the original. And heck, they actually even kind of start to do it at some point when in the 3rd act we meet a school administrator, and his bureaucratic back and forth with the girl shows that the filmmakers could have done this and pulled it off wonderfully.
How could everything essential fit into just one book?
It is incredibly succinct and single-spaced.
So what? I'm supposed to read this over and over and over until I'm old?
Not at all. Here, we take a more accelerated approach to growing up.
Instead, the girl is then almost sucked into some kind of strange Clockwork Orange death trap, and I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, I loved what they did with the businessman at first. They gave him this really kind of dark and creepy edge, when I had always read and performed him as more of a buffoon.
I own the stars. I administer them. I count them and I recount them.
But what good does that do you?
Well, it does me the good of making me rich. How's that?
And what good does it do you to be rich?
It makes it possible for me to buy more stars. Plus, anything else you would think of.
Grown-ups are certainly very, very odd.
Love it. But again, the long conversation between the businessman and the Little Prince was edited down to less than a minute. The same thing with the king and the conceited man. The geographer and the tippler, gone. Didn't even make the cut. And the lamplighter, my favorite of all the grown-ups, who they actually show in like the opening credits, gone. Doesn't exist in the story. They condensed. They cut way back on the storyline with the fox, which is arguably my favorite part of the book. And this quote right here, which I write an edited version of on a card every time I'm a guest at a wedding, was lost. If you tame me, It will be as if the sun came to shine on my life. I shall know the sound of a step that will be different from all the others. Other steps send me hurrying back underneath the ground, and yours will call me, like music, out of my burrow. And then, look! You see the grain fields down yonder? I do not eat bread. Wheat is of no use to me. The wheat fields have nothing to say to me. And that is sad. But you have hair that is the color of gold. Think how wonderful that will be when you have tamed me. The grain, which is also golden, will bring me back the thought of you, and I shall love to listen to the wind in the wheat. The filmmakers made the entire focus of the Little Prince's journeys on the rose, and they ended up framing it as a love story, not as a personal journey. And then they condensed and oversimplified the weight of the story of the Little Prince and his rose with this.
If you would have the kindness to think of my needs.
But the rose began very quickly to torment him with her vanity.
I suppose you wouldn't have a screen. And at night, I want you to put me under a glass. A glass globe. Now. My needs. My beauty. My screen.
Now the shame of it was that they loved each other. But they were both too young to know how to love. Full of doubt, he ran away.
Of course I love you. If you're not aware of that, it's my fault. Please forgive me.
He left her? All alone? But where did he go?
Well, he didn't know it at the time, but his leaving was just the first step on a journey back to her.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, in the book, the Little Prince recounts to the aviator that particular phrase, that he was too young to know how to love her. But it reads so differently coming from the Little Prince than just a judgment coming down from the aviator. First off, the movie has condensed the relationship of the Little Prince and the Rose down to a few moments of the Rose being beautiful and kind of bitchy. When there's so much more there, when you cut out entire scenes of dialogue where you show how the Little Prince attempts to love her properly and how he has cared for his planet all this time and just how different she is, what a new experience she is, it puts everything completely into context. The Little Prince is kind and loving, and he was, quote, too young to know how to love her, unquote, because she was the first thing in his life with perspective and a personality and a point of view. And he loved and he cared for his planet, cleaning out the volcanoes and weeding out possible baobab trees, etc. And the movie, it touched on the baobabs briefly, but in skipping over his fastidiousness and his sense of responsibility, which was made repeatedly evident in his time on his planet, as well as his conversations with the grown-ups, makes his leaving the Rose seem foolish, that he was flighty, that he didn't think about things. And it also leaves the door wide open for a believer in the Little Prince to end up a foolish man-child like the movie's Aviator. And so in the movie, his journey just became all about his Rose. Not in, quote, adding to his knowledge, as he states in the book, not in learning about himself or life. It was just a journey back to her. Now, I believe that a true follower of the Little Prince would be like the Little Prince, not a flighty fool, but a protector. And his error in loving the Rose incorrectly was in taking her ignorance to heart, was to taking it personally and having thin skin. The only flaw in youthful love is a certain naivete in taking everything at face value. Growing older, not necessarily growing up, but growing older involves a certain bit of playing by rules, a certain bit of game playing, which the little prince learns through his interaction with and taming of the fox. Of course, in the movie, the fox is tamed almost instantly, and so that is lost as well. We lose the nuance when we just decide to barrel and race right through it. Look, The Little Prince is one of the world champions of chadult books, a alleged children's book that is actually more for adults. And one of the things that sets it apart from most other stories is that difference in how it approaches love. Now, for all the focus on staying young, the message of love in The Little Prince is a remarkably pragmatic one. You want a solid relationship? Work at it. Invest a lot of time. Get hurt and deal. And in the end, the magic will come. Now contrast that for a moment with every other love story we're fed as children. And most of the ones we're fed as adults as well. True love is about meeting your soulmate, and then bam, you're good. Now, you might have to maybe fight a bad guy or, get somebody out of a magically induced coma or whatever, but have a little adventure, and when you meet, all caps, the one, you're set, you're good. Happily ever after. Now, raise your hand if you're one of the lucky ones who actually got that. Congratulations. My friend, you are in the lucky minority. Most of us fell in love for the first time expecting that to be it, and then helplessly looked on in horror as things crumbled and self-destructed when they weren't supposed to. But why? We found our prince or princess. Why is this not working? This movie took a wise and unique and beautiful take on romantic love and dumbed it down, and that is one of its greatest sins. Speaking of sins, I guess it's time to start talking about the third act of the film. Now, up until this point, my main critique had been what I considered a subpar adaptation of a beloved story. If I had never read the book The Little Prince, I likely would have enjoyed what I had watched. And I can see why it's been getting some good reviews and why people have enjoyed it. But from here on out, I'm going to be talking about the third act, the last 40 minutes or something of the movie, which I consider not only an affront to every fan of The Little Prince, but a parade of bad choices that merge into a bad movie. I need a drink. So, all right. The Aviator shares the end of the book, the apparent death of the Little Prince. The snake, again, a completely wasted Benicio del Toro opportunity, promises the Little Prince an easy one-way ticket back home. And in the book, it's left open as to whether the Little Prince literally dies or dies figuratively or didn't even die at all, actually was able to then kind of teleport back to his planet. But in the movie, the Aviator discusses this moment with the little girl as kind of a bridge to discussing his own impending mortality.
You said he's up there, didn't you? Back with his rose?
Well, it is as he said. I look at the stars and I hear him laughing.
But you don't know for sure.
Well, it would comfort me very much to know for sure, but instead, I choose to believe he's up there.
Is that what you want me to do when you go? Just look up to the stars? And make believe that you're not gone?
Oh, but if you look with your heart, I'll always be with you. It's just like I know the Little Prince will always be with his rose.
But you can't know for sure. What if he's not back with his rose? What if he's all grown up and alone?
Oh, but...
What if he's lost and he's forgotten everything?
Wait. Sweetheart, the Little Prince will never forget. He'll always be up there for us, to help us.
I don't want his help. I hate the Little Prince. I wasted my whole summer on The Little Prince.
But-
I wish you had never told me this stupid story.
Now, her reaction is completely understandable, and it's the reaction that most of us have the first time we read The Little Prince, or just when dealing with the concept of death at all. So what happens here? In the great tradition of Charlotte's Web and Bridge to Terabithia, the girl makes her peace with her friend's death, and then uses the lessons learned from him to make the world a better place. Psych. No, that doesn't actually happen. Instead, she hops in the aviator's plane, and her stuffed fox comes to life, and then she flies into space, where she lands on a planet where the little prince has grown up, is a bumbling milquetoast loser janitor who goes by the name Mr. Prince. No, really. But oh no, wait, there's more. The planet he's living on has been conquered by the businessman, who has taken his ownership of the stars to bold new levels and has now encased every single star in a huge glass globe and uses them to power his dystopian planet. Okay, look. I'm well aware that it's strongly alluded to that this adventure didn't literally happen. You know, like the fox doll coming to life and the businessman's globe of imprisoned stars kind of resembling the vacuum cleaner when the girl vacuums all her glow-in-the-dark stars off the ceiling, etc. There are some things that hint that this didn't actually happen. But if you wanted to make it obvious that this is either a figment of the girl's imagination or a story she's creating herself, then the animation style should have changed. Just like how the animation differed from the Pixar-style animation for the real-life storyline and the Nightmare Before Christmas-style animation for, story mode, quote-unquote, but they did not do this. So I will progress with this review as if this adventure actually happened. And if it didn't happen, then it's just, again, a poor filmmaking choice. And there's so many things wrong with this. I'm not entirely sure where to begin. So, all right, first and foremost, this grown-up version of The Little Prince is terrible.
Oh.
Oops.
Why did you do that? Why did you do that? It's all right. I don't need to cry. I don't need to cry. I'm a grown-up. I'm a grown man. My brush just got knocked over. I don't need to cry.
Hello.
Now, I can see what they were trying to do, and it's obvious the story they were trying to tell, but did Mr. Prince have to be so annoying? He's not even a lovable loser. He's just this miserable, sad sack, bumbling, clumsy, sniveling, cowardly, and completely lacking in any positive attribute whatsoever. Not only is this terrible in terms of being just hard to watch, but it's an insult to the character and the message of The Little Prince. So, following the logic of this particular story in line, The Little Prince, despite being equipped with great wisdom and insight, was brainwashed and crushed by this society. And in this society, ruled by the businessman, which is obviously a dark reflection of our own society, the Little Prince has no choice but to not only sell out, but to be really, really, really bad at it. And I understand the point they're gunning for is that Mr. Prince has some kind of PTSD amnesia, but and when Mr. Prince, through the intervention and heroics of the girl, remembers that he's actually, or once was, the Little Prince, it's a moment that's just cringy.
I've given you 371 jobs, and you have been fired from 370 of them. I think it's time you get back to work, my little failure.
No! Please, you've got to let me...
Wriggling.
Stop! Take your hands off her.
What? Stop.
I'm not a failure.
Oh?
I'm the little prince.
What? He thinks he's little. And a prince. Wonderful. Look at me. I'm a bumblebee. What are you, a duck?
He's hopeless.
I'm not hopeless. I'm hopeful. That's right. I'm full of hope. And I love a rose. And she loves me, and she's waiting for me. So, I don't think I want to work for you anymore. And, I quit.
No, dude, you're not the little prince anymore. Sorry. Doesn't mean you can't still be a prince or a king, but you're not the little prince. This movie and this final storyline tells us that belief is stupid. Now, rewind a moment. Remember, the aviator told the girl that he chooses to believe that the little prince is together with his rose. And the girl, since she has no empirical evidence of this, goes off to find out. You know what? She's right. For decades, Mr. Prince has lived in a soul-crushing, near-suicidal personal hell, a hell that the aviator could have saved him from, if only he hadn't so foolishly believed that the little prince was just fine. It took a daring rescue to save the little prince, which is another thing that bothers me. And in order to be heroic, this girl had to fly a plane into outer space and defy a military-industrial complex. It had nothing to do with, quote, what is essential is invisible to the eye. It had to do with swashbuckling. A story like The Little Prince is a quiet story. A story that is both universal and personal, teaching us, the reader, that we can help people in ordinary ways that are heroic. Do you really need to have a coda to the tale of the little girl? You want her to be a hero? Great. Have her help her mother. Use that selfless love that she has learned to teach her mother kindness and to teach her that what truly is important is invisible to the eye. It is not in a chart. It is in a hug. Now, this was alluded to in the final scene of the movie as the girl and her mother are stargazing together, but how do we get there? We've shown children how to break a humongous glass case of imprisoned stars, but we haven't shown them how to save their mother who is withering in front of their very eyes from neuroses and heartbreak. That is heroic. That is something that every person and every child watching this movie can do. How do we do that? Show me that if you need to add something to this story. You do not make a movie out of The Little Prince simply to entertain. You do it to teach. And what has this taught us? It's taught us that your options are to grow up, and when you do, you either become a fool or a pitiful sellout. Look, I hate to be cynical because, frankly, the Little Prince himself wouldn't care for it, but these choices have to be for money, right? I mean, why else would you take a timeless classic and a multi-generational bestseller? This book continues to sell insane amounts, and it's not just to high school French students. This story is successful completely on its own. Did it really need a villain? Or multiple wild plane rides? Or making the soul of a movie a dim-witted fool who spends almost all his screen time acting like a buffoon?
Never!
No, it's my fault. My face shouldn't have been there. Oh.
Now, perhaps it's been a while since you've read the book, or maybe you haven't read it. But let me share with you how the book ends. So indulge me for just a moment. Here, then, is a great mystery for you, who also love The Little Prince. And for me, Nothing in the universe can be the same if somewhere, we do not know where, but if somewhere, a sheep that we never saw has, yes or no, eaten a rose. Look up at the sky. Ask yourselves, is it yes or no? Has the sheep eaten the flower? And you will see how everything changes. And no grown-up will ever understand that this is a matter of so much importance. And then there is a single picture of a very simple landscape. And the caption is, "This is, to me, the loveliest and saddest landscape in the world." It is the same as that on the preceding page, but I have drawn it again to impress it on your memory. It is here that the little prince appeared on earth and disappeared. Look at it carefully so that you will be sure to recognize it in case you travel someday to the African desert. And if you should come upon this spot, please do not hurry on. Wait for a time, exactly under that star. Then, if a little man appears who laughs, who has golden hair, and who refuses to answer questions, you will know who he is. If this should happen, please comfort me. Send me word that he has come back.
Hush, now creature, dry your eyes. I know a place where a body can hide.
Now tell me, after hearing that, is your first thought, you know, I bet there is no sheep. The rose is dead, and the little prince is never coming back because he was enslaved and brainwashed on the most depressing planet imaginable. Pfft. Only a grown-up would come up with something like that.
Though my days are over, you know where I'll be. Swim that lost river to me.
Well, thanks for listening. I really needed to get that off my chest, and, well, I'd love to hear your opinion. My name's Joe Thoreau. Email me at 401stories@gmail.com or hit me up on Twitter or Facebook. I'm 401 Stories on both. The 401 Stories podcast releases a new episode on the first of every month in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or directly from 401stories.com. Thanks. Peace.
The croak of the frogs will lead you true. Wear a skirt of greenstone so I know it's you. Oh, wear a skirt of greenstone to drag you to the blue. Though my days are over, you know where I'll be. Swim that lost river to me. Though my days are done, the waters will always run. Find the light.